Hey, welcome to the Hangar Z Podcast, brought to you by Vertical Helicast. In this three-part series, we sit down with two outstanding Americans, Calvin Dockery and Dave Ritchie. Both Calvin and Dave are U.S. Army veterans who flew MH-47 helicopters in the world-renowned 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. The 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment's mission is to organize, equip, train, resource, and employ Army Special Operations Aviation Forces worldwide in support of contingency missions and combatant commanders. Known as Night Stalkers, these soldiers are recognized for their proficiency in nighttime operations. They're highly trained and ready to accomplish the very toughest missions in all environments, anywhere in the world, day or night, with unparalleled precision. They employ highly modified Chinook, Black Hawk, and assault and attack configurations of Little Bird helicopters. Soldiers of the 160th have been actively and continuously engaged since October of 2001. Today, the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment continues a sustained and active forward presence in the U.S. Central Command area of operations at multiple locations in support of Operations Enduring Freedom. The 160th also provides support to the U.S. Southern, Pacific, Africa, and European commands. Calvin is now a pilot for Alaskan flying the 737 as a first officer, and Dave is now the Chief of Air Operations for the Washington State Department of Natural Resources. In this episode, Dave recounts his involvement as an Army Ranger in Operation Gothic Serpent in Somalia. Many of you know this operation from the movie Black Hawk Down. Dave and Calvin both talk about the 160th selection process and provide some detail on the ship they flew, which was the MH-47 Chinook. The MH-47 differs from its CH-47 sister model with its incorporation of combat systems designed to make the helicopter more survivable on missions deep in enemy territory and during nighttime low-level flight. In this episode, Calvin and Dave talk about their mission deployment tempo when they were with the Night Stalkers. We talk about the impact their service had on their families. We also talk about the transition from civilian life to their current jobs. We also get a chance to discuss what they're doing now. On that, Jen Boyer wrote an outstanding article for Vertical titled Washington Department of Natural Resources, First Line of Defense. The article also includes photos and videos by Sean Adams. We'll put a link for the article in the episode description for y'all to check out. Thank you to our sponsors, Garmin, Shoutover, and CNC Technologies. Cheers.
Welcome to the Hangar Z Podcast, brought to you by Vertical Helicasts. The Hangar Z Podcast is the first and only podcast dedicated to promoting and exploring the personnel and equipment behind the missions in public safety aviation. Join your host, Jon Gray, Jeff Ratkovich, and Jack Shanley.
Still southbound, skidding to a stop. Stand by here. Looks like you're getting ready to bail. Heads up, guys, bailing. Okay, the guy, he's running through the house, jumping the fence, threw the shotgun, threw something out. Grabbing the shotgun. Don't go over that fence. Don't go over that fence. Grab the shotgun again. He is armed. Stay there. Hold your position.
4 on the stop. You're in custody.
Good advising code 4 on the stop.
Tell us what I know what you mean, but tell everybody, what do you mean by that finger laser?
We had a little extra cash, in the unit we were in. So one of the things we all flew with, and I don't know how many we had, but we had a lot of them, but we all flew with these lasers that would attach to your finger, and it would just kind of go right here on your index finger, and it had a button on the side, and you could push it, and it was an IR laser, and it would shoot, a mile or so. It was a very, very powerful IR laser. It was class whatever laser, but it attached there, and it had this kind of almost like glove-like thing that went around on your hand and then Velcroed to your wrist, and so it was always there. Typically, I would fly with mine as a flight lead. When I was a flight lead, I would fly with it on my left hand, so I could push buttons easier with my right hand because you're in the left seat, and I would laze with, So when you were flying in, if the ground force or the customers were sitting on the ground and we were coming in, the TTP the technique would be all the ground force would laze with their IR lasers on their weapons where they wanted us to land for exfil, and we would match with our IR lasers on our finger. We would match it. And as soon as we matched it, they would turn them off. And that would be for all 3, 4, 5 Chinooks, whatever. So everybody knew exactly where you were landing. But when we were going in for infill, we didn't have that. So we would oftentimes, whoever, the FMQ or the flight lead would laze exactly where he wanted, hey, right there's your LZ, land right there. And so you had a good target. That was one of those things when we started doing that. I don't know when we started doing it. It was 7, somewhere around there. It was huge. Yeah. Everything got better. But the benefit of it, you could point out towers, you could point out wires, hazards. Yeah. I know that you can't really do that inside of a city, but it was invaluable over there,
Yeah. Did you use it to point out threats to your gunners?
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
You were always hoping that you shot them in the eye just so it'd do a little damage, just in case they missed. But no, we did though. We would point out threats. Oftentimes our gunners were so good, and they were just always head on a swivel. They would see guys because they were looking out. They would see people shooting or looking before we would, unless they were coming right at us.
How well did you know Jimmy before that night? I mean, or did you? I think I know the answer to this, but how well did you know Jimmy and your other customers that you were working with a lot? Pretty well?
Pretty well. One thing I tried to do when I became a flight lead, because before I was a flight lead, the other flight leads, like, you weren't allowed to talk to anybody unless you were a flight lead. So I tried to bring in, I think it was our first rotation in 4th Battalion, where, I started bringing people in. You're like, oh, you're Bravo 26, and like, guys have been flying in the back forever because we only work at night. And, you never see these guys. So at least like the pilot and commands and stuff, we would all just hang out at night or go hang out with recon and watch movies and play cornhole or do whatever. But yeah, we're pretty tight, especially with like Jimmy's teams, those guys, just because we were all left in Afghanistan when Iraq kicked off. So we were with the same teams over and over and over. Because that's one thing you really have with the pilots in that unit is we have the most institutional knowledge of anybody, because even though, the SEALs come over, the Rangers come over, it's a new platoon leader, it's a new chief. Well, we're still here. So, that was the bad part where I was talking about that mission where we're like, you guys can't do this. We've already did this mission 3 times, guys. Like, not saying I'm not testing you. We're just, we know what the terrain is. We had some of the best mapping software in the world, and we know what, the team's abilities are. And we're just there at the end of the day. If we get an order to go, we go, unless we elevate it really high, if the cost is going to be too much. But we always try to give them a secondary option in there, which is also a big responsibility you're taking upon yourself in the unit when you're changing ground tactics or suggesting you change them. But one of the reasons, like I said, the unit was created, is to assure they accomplish their mission, because they're not thinking about when that dog gets shot that we got to go to Bagram because that's where the K9 doctor's at, or if this guy gets burns, he's got to go to Kandahar, or we have that expertise. We have the best medics in the world. They're all Special Forces medics. To include, there was one night, it was really kind of my defining moment as a flight lead. It was my first flight lead rotation, 9/11, and I tried to turn a mission off, and I let him push us into it, and Cal was on the aircraft with me, and two SEALs ended up getting killed that night, and we end up having to land in a courtyard in the middle. I physically had my rifle out at one point, telling Cal to look the other way because we're going to have to shoot through the windows because we let them put themselves in a really bad situation, and we had to get them out of it. And it never should have went down that way. It was like 9/11, 100% Illume. We've been doing missions there for months. So after that, it was like, look, we have to make sure, a lot of our customers love them, but a lot of them just want to do one more mission than the last group did. And it's, what are our missions? These are elite people. We shouldn't be doing Army jobs, that the Army can be doing. We should be doing our targets. If we have to sit, we sit. And, all of them don't do very long rotations like the Army. Like I said, our average is 45 to 60 days. So people want to get to it. But, they only do 1 or 2 a year, where we're doing 3, 4, and 5. And then plus, we're doing another 6 or 7 TDYs to LA, to Guam, to Cambodia, Thailand, wherever. So it's kind of hard being in the unit because you come back knowing you're going back to the desert, and I got to go do water qualifications with Special Forces because I got to keep that qual up, or I got to go land on a ship.
On that topic, let's just use 60 days. Let's say you went to Afghanistan for 60 days. Tell us, how many missions in that 60 days? What was the mission tempo for you guys on a deployment like that?
Well, it could be none or it could be 60, and you're flying the day you get there. So they would literally give us, whatever to be ready when we get there. And the guy that's been there for 60 days, guess what? When he gets home, he's got a week before he's got to be at Fort Campbell to do assessments. He's going to high five you and say, "Oh, later, dude," and drop all his magazines because he's getting on that plane out of there. And you accept that because you want to do the same thing, because, and the worst thing, it's always your day is coming up and then the plane breaks, or, the Air Force does Air Force things, and, they don't have the same standard, plus or minus 30 seconds time on target.
They don't?
So it's like plus or minus 3 or 4 days and we'll get you there. So, yeah, I mean, you literally, and it's pretty high profile. So if you think back, I think everybody in Afghanistan was related to Karzai. So if like one of his cousins got killed, we got stood down for 30 days. I mean, there was a good stint. And what was it, 05, 06? We played Black Hawk Down at Call of Duty every day. It was pretty good. Me and Cal were pretty good at those things. But then as it went on, it was like you would just pray to God you'd get a night off. But the bad thing was, even when you had a night off, we're the only people that could come rescue us, right? So if you had a night off, you'd have to watch, Kill TV or whatever and pray to God someone didn't crash because you'd have to go get them, which happened a time or two. Where you're like, you just ruined my night. I can't watch a movie, can't play Call of Duty. I got to go get these guys. And
we usually had about 4 elements of the 160th operating in Afghanistan at a time, sometimes more. So what he's talking about is we were Jalalabad, and if somebody piled one up down in Kandahar, off we would go down there to recover, help them recover or whatever. So, and they had their own unique customers down there. Might be SEALs, might be Rangers, might be the other guys. So,
yeah, we never really learned our lesson either, because they'd be like, "Hey, we're in Bagram. Hey, you're going to Kandahar for 3 days." 5 weeks later, we're still sitting there with our 3-day bag.
Same pair of underwear.
Yeah.
You brought something up that I thought was interesting. You talked about, how you as pilots had seen missions successes and failures, in the institutional memory that kind of went through the ranks didn't necessarily see the same thing you did. And I think the parallel in law enforcement's the same way. In air support, we're over almost every critical incident in the city, and all the time. So, you might have a supervisor on the ground who's, one, either a new supervisor, or 2, hasn't been on that type of critical incident recently, where the air support unit that's overhead has been on 5 of those in the last month. So it's interesting, that I don't know if I have a takeaway necessarily, other than air support, I think a lot of times is an untapped resource when it comes to diffusing these situations or coming up with a solution for the problem, because we've seen all the successes and the failures in our time in aviation, and like, again, we're over all these critical incidents. And Jack, for you in LA, it was every flight you guys are over some critical incident. Any insight from you on maybe ways of agencies tapping into that resource for aviation and dealing with these critical incidents?
Thank you to our sponsor, Garmin. Now, Bell 505 and Airbus AS350 operators can focus more on the mission while reducing pilot workload with the Garmin GFC 600H flight control system. Think attitude hold, hover assist, stability protection, and more. Details at Garmin.com.
Letting your customer, while we're talking to Cal and Dave, I'm going to use that, letting your customers, your patrol officers, know what you can and can't do ahead of time is really important. And having strong, experienced tactical flight officers that are willing to take that risk and take charge of things, and not be scared to tell somebody that's the wrong route. You're making a mistake here. Say it more professionally than I just did. Paint that picture. We use that term all the time, 100 times a day, especially when training TFOs. Paint that picture so that they make the right decision of maybe not doing something that is very clear to you, without saying, "Hey, stupid, don't go down that side of the house." Well, if you paint the right picture, they won't go down that side of the house. But yeah, the critical incidents, we've talked about it many times, John, when I was a guest on here, about how it's different than everything else. And you have to be willing to be a strong leader and give tactical insight, one of my favorite terms, provide that to the people on the ground so that they can make good decisions. And the bottom line is, if you see them about to make a decision that you know is absolutely wrong and it's going to get them hurt or killed, or at least the potential of that, you need to tell them to stop. Stop, back up, grab some cover. Don't do that. This is why. The guy is right around that corner, whatever it is. So that's just a quick thumbnail of what we're talking about. But I agree, from what Cal and Dave have been talking about, they were involved in that a lot, especially with mission planning, giving their 2 cents, telling the customer, hey, that might not be the best way.
Yeah.
Let's talk about this. Here's an alternative.
Right.
I love that. And we need to be strong leaders, even as air crews 1,000 feet above the scene.
Yeah.
We still need to be strong leaders in that respect.
Earlier in the conversation, we talked about saying no to things. And when we were at Echo, we did a safety panel down there, and that was a part of the conversation we had as a safety panel is the pressure to respond, and you guys in the military are subject to the same radio traffic that we are in law enforcement. You hear your buddies, your customers on the ground that are pleading for help, needing air support or needing a resource. And as pilots, the worst case scenario is when you're in a no-fly environment, the weather's bad, whatever the reason you can't respond is bad. So what we talked about in this panel is when you come to select folks for these positions, you need to be able to select folks that can say no, that won't succumb to the pressures that you're hearing on the radio, the calls from the watch commander or a superior, someone who's in charge asking you to go respond to this thing when you can't do it for whatever the reason is. So I highly encourage folks, again, looking at the selection process, look at the folks that can say no, because that's the hardest thing I think that we are ever asked to do, is to say no to a mission that we want to go to, especially when it's your friend that's pleading for help on the ground. That's tough.
Great point. Very good point.
Well, one thing that helps with that, especially with the weather and stuff that we had, was this called go, no-go criteria, and everybody knew what it was prior to. So I'm not the one that's shopping for weather to see if I can get in there that, hey, this report and this report says this, we're not going. Sorry. That was the biggest thing with them making this unit, like I said, was Eagle Claw. The pilots, because they weren't really, part of that planning, they had all kinds of go, no-go. They went below men force in helicopters. They went below men force on ground forces. And the ground commander could just go, nope, keep going. Nope, keep going. Well, why do you have a plan then at that point? Yeah. So it's pretty miserable, like learning in the 160th, all the planning. I mean, it was probably something to the effect of 10 hours of planning for every hour of flight. And the only reason we started getting where we could in Afghanistan to where we went out is we already had all that stuff planned out. The only thing we had to do was plan that. Everybody already knew all the other plans that was going to happen. I knew what every other strike force was doing. They knew what I was doing. But if we go down, 2 helicopters and 3 is minimum and 3 is all I have, it's off. We're not changing the plan on the fly up until that person's in. So, because it was a big one with us. They're like, man, you got miniguns and you got 240s. Come do overhead aerial suppression for me. I'm not going to plan for that because that's why Black Hawk downfired. That's why we have Apaches. That's why we have Little Birds. Order what you need. Now, once they're on the ground, it's a different story. I'm going to do what I have to do. But also, I got to think about they're 100 miles from the nearest base. That's the only way to get them out. Do we really want to do this? Because at the end of it, we might not be able to get them out then if we get one of ourselves shot down at that point. And that's what that unit was great about was, we're 6 contingencies deep in everything we had ever planned. And guess what? Because we had those contingencies, whatever happened, we'd never have a plan for it, but we could deviate based off all the other plans we had.
Yeah, the go, no-go stuff is super important. And you'd think, every law enforcement agency or public safety aviation segment would have their own go no go criteria just as it pertains to weather. And it shocked me how many agencies do not have a set in stone weather minimum that you've got to adhere to, because you're like, oh, well, you can't play it by ear. You got to, if it's set in stone, this is your minimum, whatever that minimum is. If it's below that, we're not going. It takes the pressure off that crew to feel the need to respond. I think that's super important. And Jack, you talked about an incident that you were a part of. And I think you talked about it as being a training incident. And you guys told the commander you couldn't do this training incident. And the commander's like, well, if this is real life, you would have gone. I'm like, no. We're going to respond like you guys talked about. The way you train is the way you fight.
Exactly.
So there should be no difference.
I remember that vividly. And we sat there with our jaws dropped and said, did he just say that? No. We make the decision. That isn't what you want us to do. It's what we can do, both legally and ethically and morally and all those things. They all add up. But he was convinced of that. And he got corrected by a supervisor, went to him and said, hey, just so you know, that was a false statement that you just made. And that was good that happened. But it allowed me to write an article about it. So that was kind of cool. So I appreciate the content, but it was stunning to hear that. We all stood there stunned.
Calvin, can you talk a little bit about the pressure to respond and some of your advice on some of that for the folks that...
Both of you have been in the same situation that Dave and I've been in when you've already got them on the ground. So you're talking about, officers, patrol officers have a suspect surrounded right now and they're pinned down. Things are, I guess they get a little bit more dynamic when somebody's on the ground and you're already committed or they're committed and you want to go help them out. But prior to them getting in that situation, I think that was where our role was fairly important with saying, hey, look, we've already told you guys what our left and right limits are for this mission tonight. Like for you guys, maybe they haven't got there yet. Maybe they're en route, but kind of what they're planning on is having some LAPD air support overhead help when they get there. But you guys are on the backside saying, we're not going to be able to support you because of the weather. So the go no go criteria. But if they know that in route, if they know that in advance, they know what your left and right limits are because of your SOPs and you've kind of delineated that to all your folks down below. Maybe they know that you're not going to be there and that changes their mind. Maybe we need 10 extra officers. Maybe we need SWAT. Maybe we need something else. But for us, at least, it was maybe there is nobody coming to help. So let's just roll this mission 24 hours and we'll plan something more dynamic tomorrow night or something like that, but it sucks saying no. No, don't get me wrong. I hated it. Dave always loved it, but I hated it. So.
I always gave him other options.
Yeah.
As we wind down here, again, we'd love to keep you for 5 hours, but we're not going to do that to you. I have to include this because I feel strongly about this, about military families and how, we look at veterans and active duty and say, wow, they're doing such a great job. And many people forget, that the families at home and how the life of being in the military affects them. And I've had the honor of getting to know both of your families a little bit, and they amaze me. Talk about what the life of a Night Stalker did to your families and how it affected you and how you dealt with that.
Thank you to our sponsor, Shotover. Shotover Systems is the leading developer and manufacturer of high-performance gyro-stabilized cameras with advanced real-time AR mapping and mission management, all backed by unparalleled custom training and support. Now offering the M2 multi-sensor system, sole 6-axis EO/IR platform with 4K Ultra HD color and infrared technology. Ideal for law enforcement and defense. Offered with real-time AR overlays to quickly identify streets, weather, and traffic. Automated license plate recognition, 24 megapixel digital photographs, and automated steering and tracking.
There's a reason I'm not a Night Stalker anymore.
Yeah.
For me, it was it was the constant. We just gone so much, It's like Dave mentioned, we would get back from a rotation and we're gone on a training mission somewhere else, and it was a constant grind for them. And I think my family seems pretty well adjusted, I believe, but in the end, it was just too much. So there was opportunities to take breaks. And I don't think that, and when I say take a break, you could go back to the regular Army. I really didn't want to do that. But a common break was going back to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and holding down a job there. There was a lot of jobs there as a flight leader, an FMQ. You could go and maybe you only did one deployment instead of 3 that year. And you didn't have to go on so many training missions. But my family didn't want to uproot it. We were up here. We started off at Campbell. We moved up here. And then my kids were in high school, and I just couldn't justify making a move again. So in the end, we chose to get out because I didn't want to, make them go somewhere else. But it's strange. I don't know why this is, but for our battalion, and it's not necessarily that way for the entire regiment, but for the 4th Battalion, we had very few divorces. I guess we just had a really good group of guys, but none of us would have been doing it without our families being there. Yeah. I can tell you, I don't know what I'd have done. What I was done, but either way, it was nice to be able to come home to a home, and that was because of them. And we lucked out. All of us lucked out.
Yeah.
I know Dave's
how many deployments, Calvin? Tell everybody how many deployments.
I did 20 to Afghanistan and 1 to Iraq.
Yeah.
Wow.
I got one little measly 30-day trip to Iraq right at the end of my career.
Dave, how many deployments?
I think around 15 and 1.
Yeah.
So
talk about your thoughts on this topic, Dave.
Our families are absolutely rock stars. You really don't see what you're doing to them as you're doing it. The only really, really good part is the family support groups, our medical, and we didn't have to move.
Yeah.
The only other part of that was I never came back and was like, oh my God, my kids grew a foot, because you're in and out, but you're in and out 10, 20 times a year. And my wife's absolutely awesome. I couldn't have done anything without her. I really didn't see, when Cal talks about me quitting, about 2010, me and my wife went through kind of a bunch of big stuff where we had to go through counseling and everything, and made a lot of money. They gave us a lot of extra money. The only thing harder than getting in the 160th is getting out if you're not a chartered. They'd rather you retire than go back to the Army. I don't know what it is, but I watched one of my other friends that retired out of there, and he was deployed 2 months before he got out, and it was like, well, I don't want to do that. One of the things I did with that money was, try to keep my family happy. So be like, hey, let's go to Vegas. Let's do this. Let's do that. And, my wife pulled away from me one time, and I started noticing she started getting kind of distant. The closer I got to deployments. And then one time we're walking around, she pulled her hand away and she was like, I feel like you're trying to make us have fun because you think you're going to be dead. It's like, well, yeah, sure. But let's have fun at that time. And at that point, I was about 20 years in the Army, and I was like, I just kind of stepped back because you're kind of on cruise control there. You're around a bunch of awesome people. Everybody's like quadruple, 5-time volunteers. Nothing against the Army, but, they can't get rid of people. And if they didn't work out for us, they were gone. They would go back to the Army, or we get them out of the Army. And, we're just kind of on cruise control. We're making a good amount of money. And it's like, well, I only got to go twice this year. I'm not going to miss Christmas. I'll miss Thanksgiving. So there's only about 90 of the 365 days I might get smoked this year, right? So this ain't too bad. But
wow.
Unfortunately, when I said it's harder to get out, they wouldn't find me a job. I had to go find myself a job because they didn't want me to leave. Maybe they did, and they just couldn't find me a job because nobody wanted me. That's what Cal would say. But
were you going to add that, Cal?
We had one of our guys down at the Army Flight School, and he's like, "Dave, you could take over." I ended up taking over like 75% Army Flight School. It was the best time I had in the Army. And Cal almost failed, but I did give him his examiner check ride. He scraped by the skin of his teeth, but I felt bad for him. I had some loyalty there, so I let some standard slide. But it was funny, though.
I reminded he quit. I reminded him daily that he quit.
Yeah. That's a funny little story of the instrument examiner course is like the hardest instrument or the hardest instructor pilot course probably anywhere. And you're just tortured for 7 weeks. 3 weeks, you're the student, you're going to fail every night. And 3 weeks, you're the evaluator and you better fail your student every night. And you got 100-year-old instructor in the back that, they're just the devil when you're going through. Well, I got to be their devil. And Cal could probably tell you about that. But the guys that sit there and torture all the Army guys, well, there's an Army guy in charge of them. And I got to be that for a while.
Yeah.
And that was one of the sweet pleasures I had there was all those people that put me through flight school because they have a good portion. I mean, probably half the instructors are retired Army warrant officers. They're just called Department of the Army civilians. And they torture you while you're there. And I got to be their boss for a while, which was kind of awesome.
So now you decide it's time and you retire. What are you doing now, Calvin?
So right out of the Army, I ended up working for the state of Washington. I was the aviation assistant division manager for the wildfire division here, and they brought me on with the kind of the plan to fly a little bit. I was going to get to fly some. That was what they told me. I was like, hey, you'll get to fly some. Our Hueys, we'll get you rated in it, but you're going to be doing a desk job, and we'll have you shuttle an aircraft around. I'm like, that's cool. That's all I want to do is fly a little bit. I don't need to fly all the time. And I was getting back into fire because I graduated in environmental sciences with an emphasis in wildland fire management from college. So I'm like, sweet, I get to do everything that I ever wanted to do. I was in a desk job. It was miserable. And Dave got to see it. He can attest to it. It was miserable. But the best thing I did there was hire our new chief pilot for the state of Washington. And it was Dave Ritchie. So
yeah,
to come in and do it. So from there, I ended up being one of the original guys that went down to Texas for Envoy Airlines and went through a rotors transition program where they take knuckle dragging helicopters and turn them into airline pilots. I went to that shake and bake course down there, and I was just about finished with that when I got an interview with Horizon, which was awesome because I didn't have to commute. So I flew for Horizon for about 5 years, and then I moved over to Alaska about a year and a half, coming up on 2 years ago. So I've been flying for them for the last couple of years.
And that's why we always text Calvin to see if he's our pilot for our flights, right, Dave? And now John will too.
Yep.
I got to run into Jack and his wife and Tracy in the airport. 2 months ago, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah.
He told me he was there. It wasn't like I ran into him. He just said, "Hey, we're here." And
I always look though. I always look for you when I'm up there. So Dave, we know that Calvin hired you.
Biggest mistake in my life.
So tell us about your job now and what you're doing with that.
Well, when I first got out of the Army, I wanted to bring it up. I went to Texas for 2 years.
Oh, yeah. There's a Longhorn there.
I was at Longhorn Helicopters running a flight school.
Yeah.
Something I don't ever want to do again. You're in a lot of young kids. My favorite thing there, though, Jack, I don't know if you remember, but I came up to Airbus with you.
We
did all that IMC training with the other pilots out.
That was fun.
So things were kind of going crappy there. The company got sold off, and our old commander used to work up in the fire division, and he'd been trying to get me to come up there, but I heard didn't hear the best things, right? And then Cal calls me. He's up there. So they call me. I got to put on my schedule like I'm going to check my rental house. I don't want my bosses to know. Unfortunately, my calendar was shared with the ops director, so he ended up knowing. But I go up there and I assess, and they decide neither one of us need to fly. We're both, one guy's still in the Army, and I know he can't get out. But we decided not to fly because neither one of us have flown Hueys forever, and neither one of us spot fires. But they really didn't want to hire me, right? Not Cal, but
not Dave, the other guy. Yeah.
Yeah, the big boss. And I went back, and about Wednesday, Cal calls me. He's like, "Hey, they want you to fly." I'm like, "Are you effing kidding me?" I go, "If you're not going to choose me, don't choose me. Like, I don't care, you know?" And so I go back up, fly. like the next day, Cal calls and he's like, "Hey man," I was like, "Dude, I'll just let you know I have conditions." Like, he's like, "No, you didn't get the job." I'm like, "Okay, yeah, because I knew the other guy was in the Army. He wasn't going to be able to get out 3 weeks. You know, I just said I have conditions. And about a week later, he called me. He's like, "Hey, you can't get out of the Army." So I was like, "Yeah, I want $12,000 to move. I want a long line school." That's why I actually came. That's when I came over to your house when I went to that long line school.
Yeah, right in Bend.
And showed up here. We had 8 Hueys. We could fly about 4 or 5 of them. About 7 pilots, and now I'm at about 20 pilots, 10 Hueys, a 206L4, 2 Kodiak K100s with very sophisticated systems that your sponsors actually did for us.
Yeah.
So nice. With Flair and everybody else, 14 drones, 30 year-round people, 85 with the firefighters. So I got 45 people from Hill Attack section underneath us, a transportation section with 10 fuel trucks and trailers, UAS section, a MSO or mission sensor operator section, a contracting section, an air tactical group supervisor section, full maintenance department, and 5 buildings at the Capitol Airport. That's about a mile away from my house. 5 hangars over in Yakima during the season. We have either the 2nd or 3rd largest firefighting force in America. We had up to 40 aircraft this year with our contractors, but we're one of like 3 states that do tankers. We're the only states that do scoopers. But yeah, we have big helicopters that we bring in and Fireboss aircraft. But we'll loan our aircraft up to Oregon, Idaho, Canada, Alaska. And then we're tied in, and everybody's qualified to do everybody's fires, from the feds to the state patrol to wherever out there. So I was the chief pilot for about 3 years. And then the job that Cal was in, it's a little bit elevated now from where it was. You know, just a lot more people and a lot more stuff going on now. I have great support overhead. Still have my wife, which is a good thing. She's, on the best thing.
Thank you to our sponsor, CNC Technologies. CNC Technologies, serving law enforcement, government, and military markets with tailored mission solutions, system training, and live 24/7 support with CNC.live platform. Explore more at cnctechnologies.com.
The firefighters over top of me, they understand. One thing that's kind of weird in fire is just about everybody's firefighter, even the program managers, and it's tough with not having that aviation background. Right in the back isn't the same as, knowing what the requirements are of pilots, the FAA, NTSB, all that kind of stuff. And they really facilitated me, 1, with the funding, but 2, with the support. I never give them a reason to question it. So they let us, as long as it's funded, support us in every aspect of everything we got. We got, a great safety plan, risk assessment process. We do a ton of training, probably more than anybody, with our pilots and crew members. So they come on about 2.5 months before all the other firefighters just to get their training.
And the results have been amazing, right? I mean, I just read the other day about I don't want to put pressure on you, but the stats. I didn't write them down, but it was very impressive of Washington's firefighting and how well they did this season in keeping fires to a minimum. Is that a good way to describe it?
Yeah, I mean, success, because we had to have a metric with the legislation, is keeping 90% or 95, something like that, less than 10 acres. Well, it's hard when it's already bigger than 10 acres, but I mean, we had about the same amount of fires and about a tenth of the amount of acres actually burned. Because
outstanding.
One of the things with our commissioner, and Cal could probably attest to it back when he was a firefighter, but they kind of scared all the firefighters from using aircraft. It's like, don't order one unless it's absolutely necessary, where we're like, treat it like an engine, get it out there, get the fire out. Because if you wait, too long to order an aircraft, then I got to order 10 aircraft, and that's even more dangerous. To those firefighters on the ground, that once again, that's my customer. I'm there to support them, but I gotta tell them the best way to use that asset. And that's where like our Heli-TAC firefighters come in, because it's not just a pilot saying this. I've got people that have been firefighters for years. We're all tied in with our ground folks, but so when we show up, we drop a couple of them off to tie in with those ground folks. So they let the aviation part do the aviation part to best support them.
Wow, good, great stuff. You've done a lot there, Dave. I know you had you were up to your eyeballs in alligators when you got there. I remember talking to you about it, and you had a lot of plans, and it sounds like it's all come together and really expanded and improved, and you're keeping. That acreage stat is amazing. That's fantastic for those people in Washington. That's great news. And by the way, Vertical just did a profile of your operation there, and a really cool picture of Dave is within that article.
Yeah, it was wonderful. My chief pilot made me do that. So
that was a great picture.
But yeah, he's been instrumental along with the other program managers. So, because there was just 2 or 3 of us before. Now I got 7 program managers. And
wow.
So his chief pilot was with us in the 160th here. He was a Blackhawk guy here.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
It's amazing how that happens, isn't it?
Yeah. Dave's little fiefdom keeps growing.
Well, when you have these high-end pilots, they can do anything, and they end up, pivoting and going to firefighting. I remember Dave saying, "Hey, I'm coming over to Bend." I said, "What are you coming here for?" "For some training at this flight school in Bend." I said, "What in the world are they going to train you in?" He said, "Long line." I said, "You've long lined boats." Firefighting long line. It's amazing. All those years of aviating, and there was still something you had to go get some schooling to do your job. That's amazing.
And I absolutely love my chief pilot. He's great, but I got a picture of him when I was going through with him, and his hand is just white holding the cyclic.
Yeah.
And when you're like, "Hey, you doing okay over there?" Because you're laying 90 degrees out. Our bubble goes out a good 2.5 feet, and like dead silence, like, "Is your helmet working over there?" Like, shut up. Like, don't talk to me. But yeah, it's something going from we're at the pinnacle of landing on ships in the middle of the night, your IMC with tankers, to, man, I can't keep this bucket in one place. What is wrong with me? And everything's opposite to what I think it is.
Yeah. All new.
But yeah, it's a good time.
New skills. And same thing with you, Cal. What a switch from, the customers in the back are now 300 customers in the back. Yeah. and they're from, a whole different thing, where they're paying customers, and you had to transition to that. And I'm sure you have some interesting experiences.
My life's a lot less stressful now, for sure.
Oh yeah. In many ways, I'm sure. I remember joking with you and saying, "Now make sure you don't come on the intercom and say, don't panic, everyone. There's some gunfire on my side of the aircraft, and I'm going to be making a hard turn here. Don't revert to any of that." But
right gun hot.
Yeah, I'm happy for both of you that you landed in the places you did, and you're doing great things still. John, anything else we want to talk about? Anything on your mind there?
Yeah, there's a ton. I honestly, I think we need to come back
forever.
Yeah, we need to come back for interviews with each of you individually and kind of profile your careers a little more in depth, because we skimmed over a ton of information.
We did skim, no doubt about it.
But you have to, given the time we have, and we want to be cognizant of your families and the things you have going on a Sunday afternoon. But the first thing I want to say is you guys are amazing Americans, to do what you did overseas for our country, and then what you're continuing to do here in the home front. Thank you guys for that. I know a lot of people will say thank you, and it's easy just to brush it off, but really, truly thank you guys. And you're continuing to influence our community, by the things you're doing now, including coming on the conference or the podcast
to talk about some of the challenges that you guys faced on your deployments. But thank you guys for joining us, and you're now part of the Hangar Z family. It's blood in, blood out. So kind of like the 160th, it's going to be tough to shake us now.
No quitters.
Dave will quit.
Well, I will echo what John's saying there, and just thank you so much for joining us and taking the time. And I'm very, very lucky that I got to know you guys over the years, and to know your families. Your families are rock stars, and so are you. And you're both humble about it. And like John said, we could really go in depth. You're just going to have to trust us, audience. These two are highly decorated. We didn't even get there and go over the long list of decorations that these two have had. And just trust us. They are amazing, and they're two good human beings and two great Americans. And I feel lucky again that we had you here today to continue our conversation from when Jimmy was with us and get a different perspective. Thanks very, very much.
Thanks, gentlemen.
It was a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, guys. John, we'll talk to you soon. Calvin, Dave, hopefully sooner. Cheers, everybody.
Cheers.
All right. Cheers.
All right. See you guys. Thank you for joining us for this outstanding 3-part series. Stick around for some updates after a word from our sponsors.
Thank you to our sponsor, Garmin. Now, Bell 505 and Airbus AS350 operators can focus more on the mission while reducing pilot workload with the Garmin GFC 600H flight control system. Think attitude hold, hover assist, stability protection, and more. Details at Garmin.com. Thank you to our sponsor, Shotover. Shotover Systems is the leading developer and manufacturer of high-performance gyro-stabilized cameras with advanced real-time AR mapping and mission management, all backed by unparalleled custom training and support. Now offering the M2 multi-sensor system, Sol 6-axis EO/IR platform with 4K Ultra HD color and infrared technology. Ideal for law enforcement and defense. Offered with real-time AR overlays to quickly identify streets, weather, and traffic. Automated license plate recognition, 24-megapixel digital photographs, and automated steering and tracking. Thank you to our sponsor, CNC Technologies. CNC Technologies, serving law enforcement, government, and military markets with tailored mission solutions, system training, and live 24/7 support with CNC.live platform. Explore more at cnctechnologies.com.
Hey, thanks for taking a few minutes to hear from our sponsors. Their support of the podcast and our industry is very much appreciated. Upcoming for the Hangar Z Podcast is the final episode we recorded at the Echo Public Safety Aviation Conference in San Diego, where we interviewed someone I'm actually friends with, not only because of aviation, but because we're friends at home and live in the same mountain community in Southern California. You'll enjoy hearing from flight paramedic Ken Fox, who works for the Big Bear Fire Department. They have a really interesting response area in agreement with Mercy Air. Also, don't forget to check out our friends Jason Quinn from the Real Rescue Podcast and Halsey Scheider from the Helicopter Podcast. The Real Rescue Podcast is a compilation of personal stories from people who've put their lives on the line and made some incredible rescues. Men and women from around the world, from different branches of service, and with a variety of experiences have been guests on this show. The Helicopter Podcast is for helicopter pilots, maintainers, and enthusiasts. The podcast features guests from a wide array of industry sectors to have casual conversation, answer questions, give sound advice, and talk shop. To find out more and listen to these podcasts, check them out at verticalhelicast.com. Cheers.
Time to close up the hangar. Thanks for joining us on the Hangar Z Podcast, brought to you by Vertical Helicasts.